We all want happy endings, whether we are watching a movie or reading a book. We always want our favorite characters to emerge victorious. Unfortunately, reality does not subscribe to these rules. People die in the most tragic ways, and for years sometimes, we don't know who did it, when it happened, or why. It is difficult to accept that the perpetrators of evil, of horrendous crimes, will sometimes go unpunished. It is difficult to accept that despite the manner in which good people were murdered, the criminals still walk around freely. Missy Bevers, Emma Fillipof, Rebecca Coriam, Mitrice Richardson, and Lars Mittank. These are individuals who either died or disappeared under mysterious circumstances and whose killers are still very much at large. Now, let's explore the stories behind these unsolved cold cases. Missy Bevers. Missy Bevers had a pretty quiet life. She was 45 with 3 kids, living in the peaceful city of Red Oak in Texas. While her children went to school, the woman worked as a fitness coach at the Midlothian's Creekside Church of Christ. Those who knew her loved her devotion towards her job and her cheerful nature. She was described as an active community member and had no enemies in her community. Known to be an early bird, Missy arrived at the church on the 18th of April 2016 by 4 a.m. Her classes were usually scheduled this early so she could work with students who had other jobs. But by the time her students arrived at the church by 5 a.m., something was out of place. Missy was found bleeding, and she wasn't responding to her name. Fortunately for the 45-year-old, she still had life in her when her students arrived. But after calling 911 and the paramedics arrived, Missy Bevers gave up the ghost, dying with the truth of whatever happened that morning. By the time she was found, Missy Bevers had suffered an injury to the head while also showing puncture wounds on her chest. Immediately, the police began an investigation into her mysterious murder. As soon as investigations began, the police officer faced a shocking challenge. After checking the church's CCTV cameras, they discovered footage of a person dressed in a full riot gear with the word police clearly etched on it. In addition to this, the person wore a helmet, gloves, shin guards, and carried a hammer. This individual in the footage checked from room to room as if looking for a person. Then, out of patience, the masked figure breaks down the door with the hammer. After carefully analyzing the footage, the investigators were able to determine 3 things. The killer was between 5'2" and 5'8". He or she had feet that pointed outwards. And finally, the suspect walked with a limp. But a very important question remained unanswered. Is the suspect a man or a woman? Making progress, the police discovered glass from broken windows scattered around the floor of the building. These pieces, despite largely unhelpful, helped the investigators to map out the movement of the suspect in the church. They also discovered that the back door to the church had been left open, which in turn explained how he or she gained entry. Using the back door to understand motive, the investigators guessed that this was a robbery gone wrong. But after robberies, things are bound to go missing. In the case of Missy Bevers, nothing was missing from the church and from the victim. Despite the wounds and evident struggle, the woman still had her wedding ring on. As earlier mentioned, Missy lived in a quiet community, and the police officers weren't used to dealing with murder cases, so they decided to seek help. First, they released the footage from the church cameras and asked that the public observe the gait of the suspect and send in helpful tips. It wasn't long before people started sending in tips, and eventually, the FBI and U.S. Marshal's Office stepped in to assist. To further understand the motive behind her murder, the police subpoenaed Missy's phone and discovered the victim's intimate and flirtatious conversations on LinkedIn. Nothing about the messages seemed helpful until the investigators found a bunch of cryptic and creepy messages from a certain man Missy was chatting with. Due to the strange nature of this message, the police believed that Missy had spoken with her killer, probably days or hours before he or she killed her. For security and investigation reasons, the police kept the names of the people on LinkedIn classified, only available to officers working on the case. Missy wasn't one to shy away from social media. She had tons of pictures and videos explaining her upcoming boot camps. The night before she was killed, the fitness coach told her followers and friends that come rain, come shine, the class would hold regardless. Perhaps this was a premonition of her own death or a simple marketing tactic. It is impossible to ever find the truth about that. Also, Missy's public social media accounts made it easy to track her movements, and police believe that the killer surely checked her accounts before he attacked. It wasn't long before her husband, Brandon, became a prime suspect in the case. But he had a solid alibi that proved he was somewhere else the morning Missy was murdered. His alibi checked out, and this caused the police to ask him if he knew anyone who would want to kill his wife. As expected, he said Missy didn't like trouble, so it was hard to imagine that she had gotten in trouble with dangerous people. Brandon claimed his marriage was a happy one, adding that he and Missy used to have the best time. But this was a blatant lie. It wasn't hard to see that the relationship was plagued with constant fights, financial issues, lack of trust, and infidelity. To make things even more complicated, the investigators found out that Missy Bevers was a licensed gun owner, but for some twisted reason, on the day of her murder, she decided to leave it in the car. After Brandon was let off the hook, the attention of the investigators turned towards somebody else, Brandon's father, Randy. Just 4 days after the murder of Missy, Randy had driven into town and given a dry cleaner the cloth of a woman soiled in blood. Randy was invited by the police, but the man was confident in his innocence. He explained that the blood-stained shirt was from a dogfight and had nothing to do with Missy. But there were strong evidences against Randy. First, he walked with a limp, just like the person in the video, and he shared a similar body physique with the victim. However, just like his son, Randy had a strong alibi. At the time of the murder, he was in California, according to his alibi. Again, the alibi proved to be true, and Randy was allowed to walk freely. But this didn't explain the blood-stained shirt. To leave no stones unturned, the police decided to investigate the supposed dogfight and blood. Brandon's sister and Randy's daughter, Christy, confirmed the words of her father. There had been a dogfight, she said, and after test results came back, it was confirmed that this was actually the blood of a dog. But the public needed something to believe, and Randy was the scapegoat. A few weeks after the back and forth with Brandon's family, the police decided to check the security footage from the area. Everything seems normal until a Nissan Altima comes into view. The car goes round and round a car park right before the murder. To aid investigation, the police asked that the owner of the car comes forward, with the belief that this person might have seen something interesting. But as expected, nobody came forward, and the police were never able to find the owner of the vehicle. Unfortunately, the police kept hitting brick walls, pursuing leads that led to nothing. Slowly, the case became a month old, then a year old, then years passed since the death of Missy Bevers, and there appeared to be no end in sight. Then in 2019, the police received an anonymous tip regarding a former Lancaster police officer who everyone knew as Bobby. Full name, Bobby Wayne Henry. Bobby used to be a tactical officer, and he admitted that he still had his riot gear, even though he can barely fit in it anymore. Fortunately, there was a connection between Missy and Bobby, the former police officer, who now worked as a licensed security guard, had been at the victim's funeral, and even attended Mass at the church where Missy worked. Way back in 1996, Bobby was suspended from the police force after he was found guilty in a case of sexual assault. Several things aside the riot gear gave Bobby away. Just like the suspect, he walked with a limp, and he also had a car that was similar to the one in the car park, the Nissan Altima. Despite the eventual involvement of a forensic podiatrist, called in compared the gait and walk of Bobby and the suspect, it was difficult to conclude that Bobby was the one in the footage. Again, one strong factor changed everything in the charges against Bobby. The disgraced police officer was 6 foot 1 inches tall, a huge difference from the estimated height of the person in the video. It couldn't be him. The person in the footage was smaller than he was. Despite his innocence in the murder of Missy Bevers, police officers found several devices in Bobby's possession that showed his involvement in illegal pornography. Bobby was arrested on the grounds of this illegal act. The FBI was involved, but the case of Missy Bevers remains a mystery. Her death made the inhabitants of the community scared. With no arrest to show for it, the killer is still on the loose, perhaps planning his or her next move, plotting out the next victim. The person who killed Missy is between the heights of 5 foot 2 inches and 5 feet 8 inches, and has feet that point outwards, and most importantly, this person walks with a limp. Till date, the police still offers a $10,000 reward to anyone who provides helpful tips that will lead to the capture of Missy's killer. It is impossible for her family to properly mourn until the perpetrator of this evil is arrested and put in jail. Emma Fillipof. Right from when she was a child, Emma had a very happy spirit. She played and smiled with everyone, and her mother, Shelley Fillipoff, made sure her daughter didn't hide that pretty side of hers. Just like most other children, Emma grew up with her family in the small town of Perth, Ontario, which was located right outside Ottawa. Her mother worked as a teacher, while her father, James Fillipoff, worked as an artist. She also had 2 brothers, one older, one younger, named Matthew and Alexander, and then an older sister, Erica. Everyone who knew Emma spoke of how free-spirited she was, while a few others talked about her photography skills and her love for long walks. Similarly, her friends had the same thing to say, and they described as a lover of life, an intensely loyal young woman, one with a brilliant sense of humor. To document her own life, Emma kept a journal, some of which her mother has kept to this day. Emma and her brother, Alexander, shared a close relationship. Even though she loved her mother, Shelley described their relationship as guarded, and this was due to the fact that Shelley constantly disciplined Emma for her behavior. Immensely in love with independence, Emma moved to Victoria in 2011. Before she moved, she had lived in Campbell River, which also involved an intensive cooking program. She moved back and forth between Perth and the West Coast before finally settling in Victoria. When asked why, Emma explained she was drawn to the city, but she never said why. Now in Victoria, Emma moved from spot to spot, hanging in friends' apartments, staying in boats, and on one occasion, sleeping in a tree. To survive, she took on several jobs, including a coffee shop who had to let her go after a while. Right before she disappeared, Emma worked at the Red Fish Blue Fish, a popular spot in downtown Victoria. Emma had an exciting life, one that attracted several types of people. Even her closest friends had concerns, but these concerns weren't enough to get anybody worried. Before her disappearance, her close friends said Emma had stayed on their boat for a few days, and during this time she seemed happy. However, after her disappearance, her friends admitted that it looked like Emma was running away from something or someone. On the 28th of November 2012, Emma disappeared under the most mysterious circumstances. At first, it seemed like a usual case of a missing person, but as the investigations will later show, this is perhaps one of the most confusing cases in recent times. As soon as the investigations began, security footage showed Emma entering and leaving a building in downtown Victoria. The video lacked HD quality, making it hard to see exactly what Emma had in her hands. Some investigators argued that it was a mobile phone, while some say she was fidgeting with her hands. A mobile phone or not, it looked like something was wrong. Like Emma, the free-spirited young woman, was running from something. But what? Or more accurately, who? The next day, Emma called a tow truck company and asked that she needed to pick up her Mazda MPV van to Victoria. However, in the tow truck, Emma told the driver that she was going to surprise her family by moving back fully to Ontario. After 2 days, Emma called her mother by midnight, crying profusely, pleading that she wanted to come back home. Despite her mother asking, she refused to say what had made her so upset. Finally, Emma convinced her mother to book a flight to Victoria to pick her up, only for her to call back the next day, saying she could figure things out on her own. But later that evening, Emma would call again, upset and in tears, asking her mother to fly out to Victoria and pick her up. Again, Emma called the next morning, asked her mother not to worry, again adding that she can figure things out on her own. On the 27th of November, a few days after her first call, Shelley called Emma through the same number, only for someone from a shelter to pick up. For one, Shelley had no idea that her daughter was staying in a shelter, and secondly, where was Emma? Unsurprisingly, Emma called later that night and pleaded with her mother to come to Victoria and get her. Genuinely worried this time, Shelley booked a flight to Victoria for the next day. Again, Emma called the next day, saying her mother shouldn't bother about traveling, adding that she could figure things out on her own. But Shelley had had enough, and she flew to Victoria regardless. The date is 28th of November, and Shelley has booked a flight to Victoria. In Victoria, Emma buys a prepaid credit card of $200 and a prepaid cell phone. Later on, she gets in a cab and asks to be taken to the airport. However, as soon as she hears the fare of $60, she changes her mind and complains that it is too expensive. This was odd. Emma had over $2,000 in one of her bank accounts. How then couldn't she afford a fare of that amount? Later, around 7 p.m. the same day, Emma ran into a man called Dennis Quay while walking down the streets of downtown Victoria. Quay was worried about Emma's safety, and this caused him to call the police. However, when the police arrived, they talked to Emma and decided that she was fine. They left, leaving Emma in the open, standing with her bare feet. A few moments later, Emma disappeared. A few hours after Emma's disappearance, her mother arrived in Victoria. Unable to reach Emma after a few hours, Shelley reported to the police and Emma was declared a missing person. The police immediately swung to action. They checked her truck and found her laptop, a camera, her journals, and her passport. Then they moved to the waters, involving a dive team who scoured and searched for Emma's body. Shelley, who was now distraught, put together a search party made of volunteers and searched the streets of Victoria for her daughter. Unfortunately, despite the efforts of the volunteers, Emma was nowhere to be found. Aside unconfirmed sightings from random people, it appeared like Emma had disappeared off the face of the earth. But her mother wouldn't give up. Over the next few days, she put up posters and spoke to people who had seen her daughter. At one point, she traveled to downtown Victoria, where her daughter had frequently stayed, silently praying that someone had valuable information about her daughter. Then, a few days later, on the 5th of December, the prepaid credit card of $200 was flagged for use at somewhere close to the Juan de Fuca Recreation Center, which was roughly 12 kilometers from downtown Victoria. The police rushed to the scene and arrested the man who was with the card. Taken in for questioning, he confessed that he found the card at the Wanda Fuka Center. After he was released by the police, the man consistently called Shelley, saying he wasn't sure where he found the card. Also, he added that he was an alcoholic, which in turn explained why he was unable to remember where he found the card. Nothing was happening in Victoria, and Shelley and her family were getting increasingly impatient, so they decided to extend their search to Vancouver Island, the mainlands, and the Gulf Islands. Unfortunately, in spite of the search expansion and unlimited leads, Emma remained missing, and these tips led to a brick wall. Everything remained hopeless until a year and 6 months later, in May 2014, when a man was caught on security footage walking with a crumpled poster of Emma. He got into a store and told the storekeeper that Emma was his girlfriend and she wanted to be left alone. The storekeeper called 911 immediately, but the police arrived the next day, and the man was gone by this time. The man was wearing a green shirt with tattoos scattered over one of his arms, and he walked with an obvious limp. Till date, the man has never been found. Years passed until the search turned cold in the police archives. As expected, Emma's case became a popular subject in pop culture, appearing in magazines, articles, and podcasts. This was all because of her mother, who never stopped talking about Emma's disappearance. Regrettably, this attention brought more harm than good in the end. In 2016, Shelley and her son, Matt, were in the news for something else: drugs and weapons offenses. Eventually, these charges were withdrawn against Shelley after police found proof that she had no idea that her son was keeping cocaine and weapons in her house. This caused serious backlash from the public, unfortunately putting the story of Emma in the background. Till date, Emma remains missing. Nobody knows if she is alive or dead, making her disappearance even more mysterious after 9 years. Rebecca Coriam. March 21, 2011 began like a pretty normal day for Rebecca Coriam. She worked on a cruise ship and called her parents to inform them that she would give them a call the next day. However, the next day, Coriam didn't call her parents, nor did she return for work. In fact, her co-workers mentioned that they hadn't seen her the previous evening. This was unlike her. Her friends explained that they always knew about her whereabouts, even when she didn't outrightly inform them. But something about this time felt different, and it was only a few hours before their fears would be confirmed. Officially declared missing, the authorities began an extensive search for Coriam. On the evening of March 21, 2011, Coriam joined the cruise ship on which she worked. The ship left the shores of Los Angeles, bound for the waters of Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. At exactly 5:45 a.m. the next morning, the surveillance cameras caught Coriam making a phone call in the crew lounge. At the time of the call, Coriam appeared to be upset. She was visibly shaken as she held the phone to her ears. To make things even stranger, Coriam was wearing men's clothes in the surveillance footage. Unfortunately, this was the last time anyone would see Coriam alive. The young woman was not seen on the ship anymore. After an extensive and fruitless search, the company involved the United States Coast Guard and Mexican Navy. But despite the input of these experts, the whereabouts of Coriam, whether dead or alive, remained a mystery. For lack of any other sane explanation regarding her disappearance, the captain of the ship suggested that Coriam had been on deck 5 when she was thrown into the sea by a rogue wave. But there were several things wrong with this theory. For starters, it would have taken a wave 100 feet high to reach Coriam at deck 5. Secondly, the Mexican Navy and American Coast Guard didn't find her body in the surrounding areas. In addition, there had been no reports about a storm that heavy, then how could it be that a wave of 100 feet had thrown her off? However, one of Coriam's sandals was found on deck 5, suggesting that this was the last place she had been. Later investigations would reveal that the sandal didn't in fact belong to Coriam. It wasn't the correct size, and her friends mentioned that it wasn't the sort of sandal that she would wear. After a few months of investigations, another theory emerged. Perhaps Rebecca Coriam had taken her own life. To further understand this, Tracy Medley, Coriam's colleague and former lover, mentioned that the young woman still struggled with mental illnesses after being assaulted as a teenager. Unknown to those that even knew her closely, Medley revealed that Coriam self-medicated with cocaine. Additionally, the former lover said that Coriam wasn't on the best terms with her family, who still hadn't accepted the fact that she was homosexual. Before Coriam disappeared, there were reports that she had been drinking the night before. Medley said that she was in bad shape due to a mental breakdown and refused to go to her room. She cried, screamed, punched herself in the face, and even threw herself against the walls of the ship. When they finally succeeded in getting her back to her room, Coriam admitted that she felt like a failure because she was too cowardly to jump off the ship. Later on, investigators would point accusing fingers at Medley, all thanks to her vivid memory of Coriam's last days. However, there was no proof to tie Medley to the case, and the lady in question said she would never do anything to hurt Coriam. Today, Medley still believes that Coriam killed herself because she had tried in the past, but her family refuses to believe that this is the truth, still maintaining that someone, somewhere, knows the truth about the events of Coriam's disappearance. The case remains unsolved. Mitrice Richardson. Mitrice Richardson was born to Lettice Sutton and Michael Richardson in 1985 in Covina, California. Unfortunately, Mitrice grew up without her father, Michael, after her parents' divorce while she was little. Her mother remarried a certain Larry Sutton, who she ended up calling her father. Her biological father, Michael, had been in prison for a brief stint while Mitrice was still very young. However, as soon as he became a free man, he nurtured a relationship with his daughter, a relationship that would improve as Mitrice got older. Mitrice was a model child, smart, beautiful, and well-mannered. In 2008, she graduated from college, California State University, with a degree in psychology. All thanks to her brilliant results, she decided to pursue a graduate program. But before she started, she began an internship with Rhonda Hampton, a close family friend who worked as a clinical psychologist. During the period of this internship, Mitrice lived in South LA with her great-grandmother, Mildred Hughes. To raise funds for her graduate program, Mitrice worked at night as a go-go dancer at a nightclub and also competed in beauty pageants. But in 2009, things started to fall apart in Mitrice's seemingly perfect life. First, she broke off ties with her girlfriend, Tessa Moon, who she had been dating for 2 years. Then her mental condition, bipolar disorder, got incredibly worse, so bad that she began sending the strangest things to her mother, Lettice. In one of her final Facebook posts, Mitrice wrote, "I just want to sleep, LOL, but you know me and my crazy ideas. Let's see where they take me." The post seemed quite harmless, but knowing the condition Mitrice had, Lettice immediately tried to reach her daughter, but Mitrice refused to pick up the phone. The date is 16th of November 2009, and Mitrice suddenly picks up her car keys and drives all the way out to Malibu from South LA, arriving in the city around dinner time. She arrived at a high-end restaurant in Malibu, and as soon as she parked her car, the valet knew that something was wrong. The valet mentioned that she was distraught and was talking about so many things at the same time. Particularly, She talked about avenging the death of Michael Jackson. Seeing that something was wrong, the valet offered to park her car and help her to the restaurant. In the restaurant, Mitrice walked to random tables and joined them. She interrupted private conversations and made bizarre assumptions. For instance, she told the people who cared to listen that she was from Mars. Most of the people at the restaurant didn't bother to call the police since she posed no immediate threat to anyone. Finally, she ordered a Kobe steak and an Ocean Breeze cocktail, a meal which amounted to $89. Mitrice was unable to pay, and the restaurant asked if there was anyone she could call to sort the bill. Mitrice called her great-grandmother Mildred, but since the woman lacked a fax machine, she could not pay over the phone. Eventually, the manager called the police, who quickly arrived to salvage the situation.
Lawsville Sheriff Station Deputy Fillipoff, how can I help you?
Hi, I'm calling from Joffrey's restaurant in Malibu.
Yeah.
We have a guest here who is refusing to pay her bill, and we think she sounds really crazy. She may be on drugs or something. We are wondering if someone could come by and pick her up.
Okay, well, what's the address there?
It's 27400 Pacific Coast Highway.
And is she a white, black, Asian, Hispanic?
She's a young black girl. She's probably in her 20s.
Okay, what's she wearing?
She's wearing a black T-shirt and I think blue jeans.
Is she with anybody else?
No, it's just her.
But this was where things took the turn for the worse. When the police arrived, they had the impression that Mitrice was drunk due to her erratic behavior. But after using a breathalyzer on her, they realized that she was as sober as a judge. Still, the police arrested her on grounds of defrauding an innkeeper and marijuana possession, even though what they found in her car was barely an ounce. At the station, Mitrice's car was impounded alongside all her personal belongings. At around 11 p.m., she was booked at the station, and there she made 4 phone calls to her great-grandmother. But later that morning, her great-grandmother would say that she never received any calls from Mitrice, and the phone company also had no record of the calls. Also, the police had no record of this call because of a faulty recording equipment. Fortunately, after a while, Mitrice's mother, Lettice, finds out about the arrest and calls the police. She says that she would come to pick up Mitrice, despite the 50-minute drive, if they decided to release her that night. However, if they planned on keeping her till the morning, Lettice arranged to come get her then. She suggested that it was best to pick her up in the morning, as she had a younger daughter who she couldn't leave all alone. Just as she was about to drop the call, Lettice joked with the deputy saying, "I would hate to wake up to a morning report. Girl lost somewhere and her head chopped off."
I am calling. I'm a little frazzled right now. I understand my daughter is being brought into the station. Mitrice Richardson. Have they made it to the station yet? And she's been booked.
Okay, do you know where she's coming from?
It's some restaurant out in Malibu, and I didn't even think to get the name. The manager's name is...
The only place we have somebody that's in custody that they just announced on the radio that they're coming up is from Joffrey's in Pacific Coast Highway. It's the only female that's being brought up to the station as we speak. They actually just put it on the radio right before you called.
Okay. I'm her mother.
Oh, okay.
And are you guys going to book her and then release her on her own recognizance tonight? Because it's dark, she doesn't have a car, and I don't want her wandering out. I'm totally just taken aback because this is so out of character for her. Yeah. And you'll see when she comes in, she's well spoken. I think the only way I will come and get her tonight is if you guys are going to release her tonight. If she's going to be held in custody for some type of arraignment tomorrow, then I will wait until tomorrow. She definitely has no place, she's not from that area, and I would hate to wake up to a morning report, girl lost somewhere with her head chopped off, so I guess I would have to come and get her. Oh, my God.
Yeah, we're in Agoura Hills. The only thing is, at least in the station here, she will be separated, so nobody's going to be with her. So at least that's, the plus thing, so you don't have to worry about her safety.
Oh, yeah. No, I feel safe with her being in custody. It's being released, but I'm worried about it. It's crazy out here. All righty. Well, then I will more than likely call and touch bases with you guys a little bit later.
Yeah, she'll call you as soon as she comes in, too.
Of course, the deputy laughed it off and assured Lettice that they wouldn't release Mitrice until the morning. Around 12:30 a.m., assured of her daughter's safety, Lettice bids the deputy good night and ends the call. However, just 5 minutes after Lettice went off the phone, Mitrice was released from the custody of the police. The officers told her that she could wait in the lobby and wait for her mother. But at this point, Mitrice's manic episode had intensified, which impaired her thinking. Minutes later, as a later footage would show, Mitrice was released as she could be seen leaving the police station. Stuck in the middle of nowhere without a jacket, a mobile phone, or a purse, Mitrice began walking into the night. It is believed that she was headed towards the Santa Monica Mountains, but this marked the last time anyone would see or hear from her. At around 5:30 a.m. the next day, Lettice called the station to ask about her daughter, but her shock knew no bounds when she was informed that her daughter had been released earlier. Shaken, confused, and angry, Lettice asked that the deputies file a missing persons report, but the officers argued Mitrice has not been missing for over 24 hours, making it impossible to file a report. A few hours later, a man named Bill Smith called the police to report a woman who had been wandering his backyard around 6:30 a.m.
And we just heard a strange woman walking through the backyard here. It's a fairly large property, and she was sitting on the steps right on the back of the house here. This is kind of a circular driveway, and the gates were closed, so we don't know where this woman came from.
You said the cross was Wood Bluff?
Yeah, that's right. There's a horse trail, hiking trail access through here, but we've never had this kind of thing happen before.
What's she look like? White, black, Hispanic?
A tall, slim, black woman with afro hair.
About how tall?
Well, she was sitting down, stretched out on the wooden steps in the back of the house. Hard to tell, but she looked like she might have been medium to slightly tall, with a big afro hair, very skinny. And I think she was wearing maybe jeans or tight pants with a T-shirt.
You've never seen her there before?
No, never. Nobody ever does that. I mean, the people hike on the trail all the time. The trail goes through our property, but we leave it open on purpose because it's kind of a nice thing for horses and people.
And you said she's laying across she was laying across the steps, or?
She was sitting kind of sprawled out on these wooden steps in the back of the house, right against the back of the house.
She's since got up and left?
She's since gone, yeah. She's been gone about 5 minutes now, but as we followed over, we thought maybe a little drive-by wouldn't be a bad idea.
And what direction was she last seen headed?
Never saw her. Once she left, she just disappeared. I moved from one window to another. I said to her, I hollered down, "Are you all right?" And she said, "I'm just resting," or something like that. But she's certainly gone out of her way to get that close to the house, because the hiking trail is not that close. It's on the ridge.
All right, well, since we haven't checked the area for her.
Appreciate that very much.
Not a problem, sir.
Thank you. Bye.
Smith described her as a slim black woman with afro hair. The man asked if she was okay, and she responded saying she was just taking a rest. However, by the time Smith confirmed that she was harmless and stepped outside to investigate, Mitrice had disappeared into the mountains located behind his home. After this report, the police began an investigation into the case. They began with Mitrice's car, which was still in their custody, and found her diary. In there, they discovered that she probably hadn't slept in 5 days, a factor which could have contributed heavily to her manic behavior. While this happened, her mother didn't stop calling the sheriff's department, trying her best to file a missing persons report as quickly as possible. Eventually, when the report was filed, the case was transferred to the Los Angeles Police Department. The sheriff explained that they had better resources to tackle the case, but what he failed to mention was the fact that the LAPD is 1 hour away from the spot where Mitrice actually disappeared. Before the search began, the family was told that an intensive search party, one including helicopters, search dogs, and hundreds of agents, would investigate Mitrice's disappearance. However, when the day for the search arrived, only 4 deputies were delegated to the neighborhood. Not only did the search start 3 days after Mitrice's disappearance, but it ended on the same day, before it even got dark. Seeing that they could barely rely on the authorities, the family decided to take matters into their own hands. They made and distributed flyers, made posters, and organized volunteer search parties to find Mitrice. Seeing that this could instigate a bad reputation for his office, the sheriff reignited the search efforts for Mitrice, but at this time, the family had already lost faith in the police. Frustrated with the police and increasingly worried about the state of his daughter, Michael Richardson called the mayor of Malibu and explained everything about Mitrice's disappearance to him. Immediately, the mayor, Andy Stern, announced a $15,000 reward for anyone who could provide useful information, and it was at this time that a real search began for Mitrice. The search involved over 336 trained searchers, alongside trained search dogs and helicopters, all focused on the important mission of finding Mitrice alive. Unfortunately, the search showed no signs of positivity, but this didn't dissuade her father, who believed that his daughter was out there, somewhere, waiting for him to find her. Later on, Mitrice's family would discover that the police deputies had suddenly lost a tape that could potentially tilt the direction of the investigation. When the pressure from the family and the public reached an all-time high, the footage of Mitrice leaving the station was released, which in turn showed that the police had released her, despite her mother's pleas to keep her till morning. This information, Letice will later file a case against the Los Angeles County for negligence. On the 9th of August 2010, the discovery that everyone had been dreading finally became a reality. After more than 11 months of intense searching, the remains of a woman was discovered by park rangers who were investigating the growth of illegal marijuana in the mountainous terrains of the Dark Canyon. On August 13th, 4 days after the initial discovery, it was reported that the remains found belonged to none other than Mitrice Richardson. Eventually, the family made it to the scene of Mitrice's death and set up a memorial there. Also, the family was awarded a total of $900,000 for wrongful death due to negligence. However, the family still want to know who murdered their beautiful daughter and would not stop until the killer is brought to book. Today, the case is still open and being investigated. Lars Mittank. This last case is quite a complicated one. It all began with the 39-second video footage of a 28-year-old man running through an airport terminal in Bulgaria. The man, a tourist, was dressed in a yellow t-shirt, and as soon as he reached the fence, he jumped over it and ran into the forest. Who was this man, and why was his 39-second footage so important? The name of the man was Lars Mittank, and he was a tourist from Germany. The story of Lars Mittank is filled with questions, or more accurately, unanswered questions, many of which revolves around this particular night. The questions were simple. What happened to Lars that made him run with such fear? Who was chasing him? Or what was he running away from? What was he running towards? But more importantly, what happened in the days that led to his mysterious disappearance? In July 2014, Lars and his friend took a flight from Itzhol in northern Germany to the Bulgarian seaside resort. Both men were on holidays, and this was supposed to be their big attempt at having fun. It seemed like a pretty normal vacation until one night when Lars got into a fight in a McDonald's restaurant. The fight began while everyone was watching a football match. Banter flew from one end to another, as is typical during a football match. But all hell let loose after an argument, and Lars was unfortunate to be a part of it. During this scuffle, Lars was punched in the back of the head, causing him to get separated from his friends, while also suffering a perforated eardrum and potential concussion. Lars immediately went to a doctor who prescribed an antibiotic and further warned him not to board a plane. He explained that the noise from the plane will only make his ear condition worse. Naturally, this meant he had to stay in Bulgaria for a brief period, while his friends took the flight back home. Later on, his friends would mention that Lars was full of life when they parted ways and had not appeared like something was wrong. As soon as they left, Lars checked into a one-star hotel called Hotel Color, which was just a few minutes away from the airport. This made sense, considering he was going to be out of the country in a few days. Then, just a few hours after, Lars's mother received a phone call from her son in Bulgaria. Lars sounded scared, and he told his mother that he was being followed by dangerous people who wanted to kill. Just as he was about to end the call, he asked her to cancel all his bank cards. A few minutes later, Lars texted his mother, asking her to check the antibiotics that the doctor had prescribed. Subsequent CCTV footage would also show that Lars was acting different, running up and down the hotel foyer, checking outside the window every minute, and even hiding in the lift. Then, at around 1 a.m., Lars left the hotel and returned a few hours later. Nobody ever found out where he went during that time. On the 8th of July 2014, Lars, now fit to be on a plane, took a taxi to the airport and called his mother to inform her of his progress. However, as soon as an airport doctor began examining him, Lars became erratic again. He also became distrustful of the drug the doctor prescribed him. Then suddenly, as soon as a construction worker came into the room, Lars began pleading with the doctor. He said, crying, "I don't want to die here. I have to get out of here." As if pushed by a thought, he stood up, leaving his wallet, cell phone, and bags, and ran out the door. He ran across the airport terminal, climbed over a fence, and was never seen again. Till this day, the disappearance remains a total mystery, except for the endless theories on the internet. But we still do not know why he had run away, or what or who he was afraid of that made him abandon all of his personal belongings. It's been 7 years since the mysterious disappearance of the man, and no one knows if he is dead or alive. However, there have been reported sightings of Lars in Dresden and Schlüssel, which is just north of Berlin. A truck driver had picked up an unknown hitchhiker, and when he learned about the case of Lars Mittank, he says that the man looked like an older version of the picture he was shown. His mother has received calls and tips from around the world, all relating to the whereabouts of Lars. In fact, one call came all the way from South America, but it turned out to be Anton Fillipoff, a Canadian humanitarian worker who had also gone missing 5 years earlier. While the case grew cold with the years, Lars's mother refused to give up on her son. She has appeared on German and Bulgarian TVs a number of times, while also leading campaigns on Facebook. Unsurprisingly, several theories have emerged since the disappearance of Lars. One leading theory suggests that Lars might have been a victim of human trafficking, while another suggests that the head injury he sustained could have impaired his thinking, causing paranoid schizophrenia. His friends later added that after the fight, he started acting strange. While there exists no proof to back this, it remains nothing but a speculation. No one can say for sure what happened to Lars Mittank. All we can do is speculate and hope that word eventually gets out enough to find a man who mysteriously disappeared in 2014.